On May 1, 2025, a shocking execution rocked the state of Florida, where a Gulf War veteran became a mass murderer. Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson, who once bravely fought in the Desert Storms, finally faced the death penalty for his horrific crimes. From the haunting shadows of war to the fateful night that claimed 4 innocent lives and his final moments in the lethal injection chamber. What transformed a decorated soldier into an unforgiving killer in his own home? In today's video, we'll explore the last meal he chose and the final words he spoke before his life ended. This case revolves around 4 innocent victims, individuals with ordinary lives, tragically intertwined by Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson. Renee Flaherty, 32 years old, was Hutchinson's live-in girlfriend. She was a strong, resilient single mother who worked hard to raise her 3 children. She was once a tomboy with a strong personality, a pillar of support for her brother. Renee had divorced her ex-husband, a serviceman stationed in Alaska, and decided to start a new life with Hutchinson and her children. The 3 unfortunate children were Jeffrey Flaherty, 9 years old, Amanda Flaherty, 7 years old, Logan Flaherty, 4 years old. Jeffrey and Amanda. These children never had the chance to grow up, leaving immeasurable pain for their family and community. From a devoted mother to innocent children, they were all brutally deprived of their lives, each shot once in the head. Jeffrey also sustained an additional wound to the chest, revealing the chilling brutality of the perpetrator. Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson, born on November 6, 1962, in Alaska, grew up in Kettle Falls, Washington, with many siblings. Although all sources indicate Hutchinson had a normal childhood, he was reportedly diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, as a child. After graduating from high school, Hutchinson worked as a mechanic and security guard and was considered an exemplary employee. However, a major turning point in Hutchinson's life was when he joined the U.S. Army, becoming a paratrooper and an Army Ranger. He participated in the Gulf War, including Operation Desert Storm. After returning to the United States, the sequelae of war and psychological trauma heavily impacted Hutchinson's mental state, something his family quickly noticed. He was honorably discharged after some time. Hutchinson's first marriage ended in divorce after his military service, and his second marriage similarly lasted only a short period. Given his past as a courageous soldier, a model citizen, what pushed Jeffrey Hutchinson down a path of ultimate crime, transforming him from a protector into a cold-blooded killer. On September 11, 1998, Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson committed a horrifying massacre, taking the lives of his live-in girlfriend and her 3 children in their home in Crestview, Florida. Before the tragedy, Hutchinson had begun a relationship with Renee Flaherty, and they started living together in 1997. Renee had 3 children, Jeffrey, Amanda, and Logan, and the entire family, including Hutchinson, had moved from Spokane, Washington, to Florida. At the time she began her relationship with Hutchinson, Renee was separated from her ex-husband, a serviceman stationed in the Aleutian Islands, Alaska. On the fateful evening of September 11, 1998, after 18 months of living together, a fierce argument erupted between Hutchinson and Renee for unknown reasons. After the argument, Hutchinson packed some clothes and his shotgun into his truck, then drove to a bar. There he drank and told the bartender, whom both he and Renee knew, that he was very angry with his girlfriend. Renee had also called a friend from Washington to tell them about the argument, indicating that the tension had reached its peak. Less than an hour after leaving the bar, Hutchinson returned to their home. Using a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun with a pistol grip, Hutchinson shot and killed Renee and her 3 children. Afterward, chillingly, Hutchinson called the police and reported that his family had been shot. He was arrested at the scene without resistance. When police arrived, Renee and her 2 younger children, Logan, 4, and Amanda, 7, were found dead inside the bedroom. Renee's oldest child, Jeffrey, 9, was found dead in the living room. Each victim had been shot once in the head, and Jeffrey also had an additional bullet wound in his chest, demonstrating Hutchinson's merciless brutality. Hutchinson was then held at the Okaloosa County Jail. What went through this veteran's mind that turned him into a demon who slaughtered an entire family? Immediately after his arrest, Jeffrey Hutchinson was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder offenses punishable by death under Florida law. During the preparation for the trial, many complex factors emerged. Hutchinson's 12-year-old son told a newspaper that his father was diagnosed with Gulf War syndrome due to his participation in the war, and implied that this condition had influenced his behavior at the time of the murders. On October 5, 1998, an Okaloosa County grand jury indicted Hutchinson on 4 counts of premeditated first-degree murder. Initially, the trial was scheduled for September 1999, but was delayed until January 2000 after Hutchinson fired 2 of his lawyers. By December 1999, the trial date was again postponed until March 2000 to allow Hutchinson time to prepare an insanity defense as advised by his new lawyers. The continuous delays persisted until June 2000, then July 2000. At one point, Hutchinson even declared he wanted to represent himself without a lawyer in May 2000, but later changed his mind. Another delay occurred when Assistant State Attorney Bobby Elmore, the lead prosecutor on the case, suffered a heart attack. Hutchinson also filed complaints against his lawyers, highlighting the tension and complexity of the proceedings. Finally, on January 7, 2001, Circuit Court Judge G. Robert Barron ruled that Hutchinson was mentally competent to stand trial for the murders. Jury selection was scheduled for the following day, commencing the official trial phase for this horrific case. Would arguments about mental illness and the effects of war be enough for Hutchinson to escape conviction, given the undeniable evidence? On January 8, 2001, Jeffrey Hutchinson officially went on trial for the murders of the Flaherty family. The evidence presented at trial painted a clear picture of Hutchinson's crimes. When arrested, Hutchinson's hands had gunshot residue, and on his leg there was Jeffrey's bodily tissue. 5 shell casings linked to Hutchinson's shotgun were also recovered by police from the kitchen counter. In his defense, Hutchinson pleaded not guilty. He offered 2 contradictory stories. First, he claimed that 2 men wearing ski masks broke into the house, attacked him and the Flaherty family. Hutchinson recounted that he struggled with them, and it was these strangers who shot Renee and the children before fleeing the scene. Alternatively, Hutchinson presented another argument he was severely intoxicated at the time, and this was not premeditated first-degree murder, but rather an impulsive crime due to loss of emotional control. However, the jury was not swayed by these contradictory testimonies. On January 18, 2001, after 9 tense days of trial, the jury found Hutchinson guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. Prior to the sentencing hearing, Hutchinson waived his right to a jury sentencing, meaning the trial judge would decide whether Hutchinson would be sentenced to life imprisonment or death. Dr. Vincent Dillon, called by the defense, testified that Hutchinson suffered from bipolar disorder and was intoxicated at the time of the crime, suggesting this disqualified him from facing the death penalty. However, on February 6, 2001, Judge G. Robert Barton formally pronounced sentence on Jeffrey Hutchinson. Hutchinson was sentenced to death for the murders of the 3 children and life imprisonment for the murder of his girlfriend, Renee Flaherty. In a brief statement after his conviction, Hutchinson steadfastly maintained his innocence. Conversely, Melva Elmore, Renee's mother, expressed that justice had been served. In his ruling, Judge Barton rejected the defense's arguments for diminished criminal responsibility due to mental illness and intoxication, and further concluded that Gulf War syndrome had no correlation with the murders. Judge Barton believed that Renee's death did not warrant the death penalty for Hutchinson due to his lack of prior criminal record and his military service, and opted for a life sentence without parole. However, for the deaths of the 3 children, Judge Barton issued 3 death sentences. He considered the young age of the victims as additional aggravating circumstances. Specifically, in Jeffrey's case, Judge Barton stated that Hutchinson cruelly shot the boy in the head after the chest wound did not kill him, immediately making Jeffrey's murder especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. The day after his sentencing, Hutchinson was officially transferred to death row at Florida State Prison. Would this sentence be enough to soothe the pain and bring true justice to the Flaherty family? After more than 2 decades languishing on death row, the final doors closed for Jeffrey Hutchinson. On April 1, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the execution warrant for Jeffrey Hutchinson, setting the execution date for May 1, 2025, by lethal injection. Hutchinson was the 4th Florida inmate scheduled for execution in 2025, following James Dennis Ford, Edward Thomas James, and Michael Anthony Tanzi. In his final days, Hutchinson and his legal team made desperate appeals. On April 4, 2025, Okaloosa County Circuit Court Judge Lacey Powell Clark denied Hutchinson's appeal. By April 21, 2025, the Florida Supreme Court also rejected Hutchinson's last-minute appeal. His lawyers continued to argue that he suffered from brain damage and cognitive impairment due to trauma from the Gulf War, and that his symptoms should have resulted in an acquittal for first-degree murder or a reduction of his death sentence to life without parole. However, the court rejected these arguments, citing that this information and Hutchinson's symptoms were known at or before trial. On April 25, 2025, the Florida Supreme Court again rejected a second appeal from Hutchinson. The U.S. 11th Circuit Court of Appeals also rejected his federal appeal in the same week. On April 27, 2025, Bradford County Circuit Court Judge James Kolaw also denied another appeal from Hutchinson, dismissing claims of mental illness and finding him mentally competent to be executed. Finally, just before the execution on May 1, 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Hutchinson's final appeal. On May 1, 2025, at the age of 62, Hutchinson was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. The official time of death was 8:15 p.m. His last meal consisted of salmon mahi-mahi, asparagus, a baked potato, and iced tea. He did not make a final statement. Hutchinson was the 15th person executed in the U.S. in 2025 and the 4th inmate executed in Florida that same year. Did this death bring final solace to the victim's family, or do unanswered questions about justice and pain still remain? The massacre of the Flaherty family sent shockwaves through the entire community and Okaloosa County when the murders occurred. This case, happening 4 years after Edward J. Zakarzewski murdered his 2 children and wife, became the worst murder in the county. After the case counselors were sent to Antioch Elementary School, where the 2 older children, Amanda and Jeffrey, attended, to monitor the psychological well-being of students after school returned to normal operations. In January 2016, when Jacob Langston, 22, shot and killed his mother-stepfather and his ex-fiancee's new lover, it coincidentally occurred at the same location where the Flaherty family massacre had taken place in 1998. The brutality in Langston's case brought Hutchinson's case back into the spotlight, with community members expressing their feelings about the Hutchinson case and affirming that they had never forgotten the tragedy even after more than 17 years since it occurred. Langston was later convicted and received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole for the double murder in September 2021. In October 2018, the Flaherty family massacre was listed as one of the most heinous crimes ever committed in Northwest Florida, with Hutchinson being one of only 17 criminals sentenced to death in cases on that list. The case of Jeffrey Hutchinson raises profound questions about the consequences of war mental health and the capacity of the justice system to handle such complex cases. What led a soldier who once served his country to become a brutal murderer? Could the invisible wounds from the battlefield explain his terrible actions, or are these merely excuses for an unacceptable act? This case reminds us of the horrific cost of violence and the importance of understanding and supporting those affected by psychological trauma. What are your thoughts on the fate of Jeffrey Hutchinson and the lessons this tragic story leaves for society? Let us know in the comments below.